Ladies and gentlemen, the next generation Xbox and Windows-based PC hardware will likely be changing forever thanks to some very interesting rumours that have been swirling around online. In summary, Windows 12 seems to incorporate extremely advanced AI features, and these include such as voice, gesture and natural language, which is going to augment almost like an AI helper. And this is being backed up by many in the industry, including Intel. There's a really good article concerning this on The Verge, but I've also reached out to a couple of my own sources. We'll get into what I've heard in a moment, but let's look at The Verge's article first. Some of this information actually stems from a hardware leaker on Twitter, Leaf_hobby, and they've actually had a pretty good track record previously leaking all of the Xenon chips before launch, and they recently actually leaked the Intel Meteor Lake desktop platform. Now there are a number of interesting things here, despite the fact that this tweet has been removed. A number of websites actually grabbed this, and one of the things that is noted is that there's 20 PCIe Gen 5 lanes, not unsurprising that they've increased those, but there's also support for Windows 12. Now, as a quick aside, because I know people are going to ask, as far as I understand it, Meteor Lake S, the desktop variant of Meteor Lake, is still dead, but of course it doesn't mean that Intel haven't worked on the platform internally. Honestly, there is so much discussion what's going on with the platform, but to my knowledge, so far anyway, Meteor Lake is not going to launch for desktop, and of course it's going to be relegated to things like low power devices. However, there is also a possibility that it could be for OEMs, so for example all-in-one PCs, that type of thing, but again, I'm just adding that as kind of a bit of bonus information. In a recent interview, Yosef Mehdi from Microsoft said, and I quote, "As we start to develop future versions of Windows, I think we'll be talking about other places where AI should play a role in natural user experience." Now, obviously, ChatGPT, I don't even need to tell you guys how big of a deal it is at the moment, and just about everyone and their mother seems to be working on some type of competitor, including Google. I think even Elon Musk has mentioned about it as well. And for those of you who have been following along with PC hardware, you'll know that Intel have been pushing their VPU stuff. Ryzen mobile processors are also working with dedicated AI engines. Obviously, they've just purchased Linux, and there's going to be a lot of stuff going forward. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all of this plays out, because ARM-powered devices obviously have their own neural processing units, or NPUs, as well. So actually, one of my sources contacted me regarding this, and they essentially told me that this information was indeed correct, but it was going to go far more advanced than this. Now, they're still trying to find out some of this information, and obviously at the end of the day, some of these plans could change. But, for example, the way you use devices is going to change significantly. That is if Microsoft have their way. So you will be able to use much more natural language. This is kind of an evolution of how, say, ChatGPT handles things, where you can basically ask it a question in a very human-like way, and it will do its best, of course, to answer that question. But it means also that the actual way that you're interacting with the experience of using a computer or a piece of hardware is also going to change as well. And I was also told that this is an initiative which is going to revolve around the next generation Xbox and its platform. There's so much discussion regarding AI and how it can be leveraged. For example, in a recent interview with 4gamer.net, I covered this actually more extensively a few days ago, but long story short, AMD's own employees mentioned that yes, of course they are interested in things like upsampling using DLSS, or in their cases FSR, but they also have other things for gaming anyway that they're kind of planning, such as more advanced AI for, well, you know, non-playable characters and NPCs. There is, quite frankly, a ton of potential, especially when we start to get into other things like XR, augmented reality, virtual reality, and I think honestly we're at the cusp of a lot of emerging technologies where there is so much research being done, we don't really know what the state of affairs is going to be like in, say, 3, 5, 10 years time. This is a very crappy analogy, but I'm just getting over the flu. So it's the best you're going to get for today. But one of the things I can kind of think of this as is a little bit like the internet back in the day. You remember how the first, well, okay, if you're an old ass like me, you may remember this, but you might recall that we had, of course, you know, the really old search engines like, what was it, Ask Jeeves and other crap before Google was like synonymous with searching on the internet. And you started to have then really basic websites where it's essentially just HTML, and you didn't exactly have, like, you know, advanced CSS and PHP and God knows what else, and it was really basic stuff. It was like font color equal green kind of like coding. And then obviously we started to go to Web 2.0, and it's become like a whole thing at this point. But obviously in the early days of the internet, no one really knew just how big of a deal the internet was going to be, and I think we're at that point right now with AI. It's going to be very interesting to see how all of this emerges. I frankly think that the PlayStation, as well as a lot of devices, are going to be going this route in the future. Speaking of new devices though, there's a very fascinating article that has been doing the rounds on GameSpot, and so this is actually from an industry analyst. I'm not going to go too deep into this article because there's a lot of stuff which is to do with like PlayStation and sales, that type of thing, which I don't really want to spend too much time on. But what I do want to mention is Ampere Analysis has said that yes, there's 30 million PlayStation 5s being sold, but according to what they believe anyway, there's a very good chance that by end of next year, so if you're watching this in the far-flung future, that's the end of 2024 or late 2024, there will be a new Nintendo console being launched. Now, I'm sure many of you are groaning, and yeah, okay, this has like been rumored for how many months, how many years at this point. Well, very quick story. So, I am convinced, I'm 100% positive that there have been various iterations of a Switch successor, Switch Pro. In fact, I've had a couple of exclusives regarding it, but it has now been cancelled, and we know that they were a thing at one point or another because even Nvidia essentially leaked it. Okay, they didn't leak it; they were hacked, and yeah, that's a whole thing. You can search for that yourself. But what basically happened is we learned that there was a version of DLSS which worked on Nintendo hardware, but it was obviously unreleased Nintendo hardware. But then, since then, there were a lot of rumors that the Switch Pro was dead, and I think it was John over at Digital Foundry has also said the same thing. From what I understand from the sources who initially told me about the Switch Pro information, this is true. John is 100% correct. And they basically went back to drawing board again. The reason they've done this is apparently to bolster the performance of the hardware. And I've been actually sitting on this info for absolutely ages, and I wasn't sure when to kind of tackle it because it was so bitsy. I was like, I don't really want to make a video, you know, specifically on this, so I'm gonna throw it in here because we're talking about all this console stuff anyway. But what I was told is that the new performance targets for the Switch successor, whatever it ends up being called, is roughly on par with an Xbox Series S in graphical performance. With a caveat, I think that is utilizing DLSS, or Deep Learning Super Sampling. For those who are not too familiar with that technology, what it basically does is it renders the game at a lower resolution and then upscales it using NVIDIA's Tensor Cores, which are basically for AI upsampling. And it should be a very interesting console. I think, I'm not 100% on this, but I think the hardware is based on Orin from NVIDIA. But I think that there have been some changes, so I don't know if that is still the case or whether there have been some changes. Nintendo, they basically just iterate on their hardware quite frequently. Obviously, at the end of the day, the hardware is not released yet. So it's going to be very interesting to see what Nintendo does. Obviously, at the end of the day, if there is no PlayStation 5 Pro or Pro Xbox, whatever that ends up being called, honestly, I'm still 50-50 on whether they do release that thing. I know it was being considered. But if not, then we should actually have a fairly decent competitive run with Nintendo. I mean, I'm assuming that this console, from what I understand, it is still a hybrid system. And I don't really think that that's a surprise to anyone. Like, let's just be honest, guys. No one expects Nintendo not to release a hybrid system next time because the Switch has just been so successful. With that said, I am going to let you all go. I'm still recovering from this plague. It has been very annoying. A number of people actually have gotten sick, so if you are someone that's dealing with the flu, plague, or something else at the moment, you have my sympathies. As I said, a lot of people across the UK, and even people, just viewers and so on that I've been speaking to, they seem to have come down with something or another, like whether it's flus or colds or whatever. So hopefully you are all feeling great and well. That said, stay safe everyone. Bye for now.